Okay, welcome to 7.RP.3. This is Goal 2, Part A. This is Video 2. This is going to go along with your problems that are on page 340. This particular video also addresses the same standard of using proportions to solve multi-step percent problems. So we're still dealing with percents and we're understanding the basics of percent, so we can do some more in-depth word problems in real-life situations. So percents, they can turn very easily into decimals, and the way to do that is simply by following the following steps. To write a percent as a decimal, we need to divide that number by 100 and then remove the percent symbol. So if I'm looking at 24%, I need to divide this number by 100. So in other words, I am moving my decimal point 2 places to the left. So I have 0.24 and I need to remove that percent symbol. So it's just 0.24 is my equivalent decimal form of a percent. As well, to write a decimal as a percent, we need to multiply by 100 and then add the percent symbol to it. So to multiply by 100, we are essentially moving our decimal 2 places to the right, 2 positions to the right, and we get 40. And the last little step is we need to add the percent symbol, which is right there. So 0.40 as a decimal, 4/10 is 40%. So let's play around with this concept and do a couple of problems. We need to write each percent as a decimal. 16%, we can see that our decimal point is right behind the 16. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to say it as 16. We would say like 1.6 or something like that. Either way, it's 16%, and we can write that as 0.16. And we're dropping that percentage. So it's 0.16 is equal to 16%. Now 9%, we have our decimal point right behind the 9. Move over 2 decimal points, and when I do that, I actually can see that I'm missing a place value, and that missing place value, for that missing place value, we can just put in a 0. So 9% does not equal 0.9, it equals 0.09 or 9/100ths. So you really have to be careful about adding that place value in, that missing 0, otherwise you're going to end up with something different. Now let's try a couple more extreme versions. We have 7/10 of a percent. So 7/10 of a percent. We're going to move this decimal point over 2 place values. We're dividing by 100. So also you could put in 0.7 divide by 100 in a calculator and you'd end up with this same exact thing, 0.007 is our answer for that. So if we were to get that same thing in a calculator, we get 0.007%. So that's 7/1000ths as a decimal. We have 537%. So again, we're dividing 537 by 100 and we get 5.37. If we were to put it in a calculator, we can also do the math by moving that decimal point over 2 places, so it goes in between the 5 and the 3. And so 5.37%, or 5.37 is 537%. Now we're going to write each decimal as a percent. We have 0.2. We need to write that as a percent, so essentially we are multiplying by 100. And to multiply by 100, we are moving our decimal point to the right 2 places. So we get 2, and we have a new place value, 0. And the last little step is to add the percent sign. So we have 20% is the same as 2/10. 3.84 written as a percent. We're going to move it over 2 decimal point or place values. Or we're moving the decimal point over 2 place values and we get 384. Last little step is add that percent sign, 384%. Last one, 0.005, so 5/1000ths. Thousandths, it's essentially, it has the THS on the end, thousandths is what we're looking at, and so we need to move this decimal point over 2 place values to the right. We're essentially multiplying by 100. And if we do that, we get 0.5 percent. So 5 thousandths written as a percent is 0.5% or 5/10 of a percent. Now that we have represented, now if you did part A, video 1, we've been able to represent fractions as decimals and then decimals as, that should say percents and all combined. Fractions, decimals, and percents are all different names that represent the same number. So if we look at this, we have a half. That can be represented as 0.5 or 5/10, which can also be represented as 50%. And we can represent a fraction as a percent by first turning it into a decimal and then expressing it as a percent. So let's actually practice that. Let's represent a fraction as a percent by turning it into a decimal and then expressing it as a percent. So we need to first express each fraction as a percent, and we're going to round to the nearest tenth if necessary. So we have 5/8. 5/8. First of all, we can take 5 and divide it by 8, and we put that in a calculator. We get 0.625. And then after that, we need to write it as a percent. So we're moving that decimal point over to the right, multiplying it by 100. So we get 62.5%. And if you notice, I use the magical word calculator here. That is okay to use a calculator. 7 divided by 9, 7/9. We need to be able to write that as a percent. To write that as a percent, we need to say 7 divided by 9 and put that in a calculator. 7 divided by 9 is equal to 0.7777 repeating. It'll go on forever. So we can also round that to 0.778. And I'm rounding to this place because you'll notice in a second if I multiply this baby by 100, I'll end up with 77.8%. That is our tenths place. 77.8% is the same thing as 7/9. Let's try 2 more problems. So we have 27 divided by 13. That equals approximately, if we said 27 divided by 13, if we put that in a calculator, we get 2.0769, blah, 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 and it keeps on going. So now we need to write this as a percent, so we're moving it over, we're multiplying it by 100, moving that decimal point over to place values, and we get 207.7%. Final answer. Last one, 3 over 400, 3/400ths. If we were to do the math, 3 divided by 400 is equal to 0.0075, so 75/10,000ths. Let's move over that decimal place. There is decimal point 2 places, and we get 0.75%. So now we've done fractions into percents, we've done decimals into percents, and fractions into decimals. We've done it kind of all of it. The last little step, and I want you to pay attention to this, I'm only going to say it once. There are a few fraction, decimal, and percent groups that should always be memorized, a lot like you memorize your multiplication facts. If you do 7 times 7, you get 49. And you know that after a while, it's just second nature. You need to also be able to do that same sort of thing with percents. I want you to always remember that 1 over 5, that equals 0.2, so that's 2/10, which equals 20%. So these are just common equivalents that you need to know. If you look here, we have an actual page number that you can just write down, and I would suggest writing it down. Page 339, and on that page you can always find those common equivalents. However, I would suggest, as of right now, pausing this video and writing all of these common equivalents down, so that way when you start to do your math work, you just have them at your beck and call and you can play around with them that way. Regardless, I hope this helps, and please start working on page 340 for the assignments that are there for part A in this second video. Thank you very much for listening.